Great. Okay, now we're ready. My name is Allison Campbell. I know many of you I know well at this point as we've been gathering over the last couple of months. I am the Heritage Outreach Manager at the Washington State Historical Society. With me today, sort of on the back end, helping with logistics is Len. Say hello, Len.
Hi, everybody.
And thanks to everyone. I got fewer emails that people were struggling with the registration system. So hopefully we've kind of figured that out, but do let us know if you have any more hiccups. Just a couple of logistics things before we start. If everybody except for our presenters could keep themselves on mute, that would be great. It just allows us to kind of focus on the person who is speaking. So if you could take a second to mute yourself, that'd be awesome. Also, if you know how to do this, which I just had to call my daughter in to show me how, to rename yourself, and if you could, on your sort of screen, give us your name. Some folks have kind of numbers or nicknames or other people in their households' names. The grandkid who was using your Zoom account for a class last week. So if you can, that would be wonderful. If you can't, no problem. Just so that we can kind of check you off and keep track of who's attending the meeting today. So I have a couple of updates to share and some things I want to say before we jump into this topic, which I know is of real interest. This topic of working with volunteers in museums has come up over and over and over again. And so I'm hoping we can get some good ideas and questions answered today. I wanted to give everybody an update on our statewide reopening plan for the museum sector. That was submitted this morning to the governor's office. So we will wait for him to kind of review that and hopefully give his blessing, and we can journey forth in reopening our museums. Thank you all who gave input on that document and who signed on to that document. We had a tremendous showing of support, which I think will serve us well as the governor considers his approval. So thank you on that. We will keep you posted for sure. Also, when we gathered on Tuesday, you heard me mention or just sort of take a moment to mention the deep pain and suffering our communities are experiencing right now in the wake of the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and Manny Ellis and so many others. Do be expecting an invitation from me in the coming weeks to join a conversation about reflecting on how museums are systems for racial prejudice at times and sort of how we can engage in anti-racist work in our museums. I'm still kind of thinking and planning what that conversation might look like and what shape it might take. So if you have thoughts or feelings about how we can approach this work, please shoot me an email. And also don't wait for me, get started on your own. There are so many resources out there right now to begin doing this work and reflecting on the role museums play in this conversation. So definitely stay tuned for that. A few more words on logistics of how this is going to kind of work today. If this is your first Common Concerns Q&A with us, we extend a particular welcome to you. Again, all of the participants will be on mute, just our presenters will have their microphones on. We have 3 presenters today. They'll each speak for 5 to 10 minutes, sort of about what they've been doing in terms of volunteers at their museum or as volunteers at other museums, what their experience has been like over these past 3 months. As soon as questions pop into your head, please share them in the chat feature, the chat box. Make sure that you're sending them to everyone and not sending them privately to the presenter. You can kind of see there's a drop-down list. If they're sent to everyone, then we can all see. I will kind of keep track of that chat, and as soon as the presenters are done, I'll start kind of directing those questions to the 3 of them, and we can open that conversation up. I also hope you'll use that chat box to share your own ideas and your own thinking and what you've been doing at your museum around working with volunteers. These 3 folks are 3 museum professionals who I respect a lot, and I know that they have been doing good work in this area, but I know that a lot of you have also been doing good work in this area and probably have ideas and things that we haven't considered yet. So please see that kind of chat as a forum. Len's going to share some links and some resources there. As presenters mention things, we'll try and keep track of all of those resources, and I'll send out a big follow-up email with the recording of this session. all the links, any documents that get shared, all of that, so you have kind of a record and something that you can pass along to colleagues who weren't able to attend today. That's so much talking. I think I'm good. Oh, I did just want to say one final thing, because I've been thinking a lot about this too. I think that the way that we've implemented this stay home, stay safe policy for our institutions has maybe looked slightly different in different places in our state and in different specific organizations. We've never lived through a pandemic like this before, and so I think people have interpreted some of the guidelines a little bit differently. And I know some museums have made room for volunteers to come in one day a week or one at a time to actually work in the physical space of the museum. And I know, like at our museum, I haven't been to my office in 3 months, and certainly none of the volunteers have been in that physical space. So I just want to keep that in mind, that there is a little bit of this gray area that we can kind of talk more about and tease more about, or hopefully will be largely irrelevant once we all reopen. But just keep that in mind. That's sort of the way that you've approached this might be a little bit different than how other folks have. But I know we all want to keep our volunteers safe and happy and well supported. And so with that, I'm going to first introduce Elizabeth Rudrud, who is the volunteer manager and events coordinator at the Fort Nisqually Living History Museum. They have an enormous and robust and multi-generational volunteer corps there. But she's also, in addition, a volunteer at 2 other organizations, at the Southwest Seattle Historical Society and the Northwest Railroad Museum. So I know that she has some things to share about both of those experiences. So Elizabeth, I'm going to mute myself and head it over to you.
Hey, thank you, Allison, and good morning, everybody. Also, thank you, Allison, for touching on the current state of affairs in our communities. I think it's important to just acknowledge what's going on in our communities routinely. And I think that touches to another issue with our volunteer base is all of this uncertainty and all of the stresses that are happening in our lives. And volunteerism is definitely a place where people really connect, they really get that meaning. And especially when people are out of work, finding themselves at home a lot, what do you want to do? You want to volunteer more. But we're really having a hard time finding ways to connect people. So with the Fort Nisqually Museum, like the Washington State History Museum, we are closed to the public, we are closed to staff, and closed to volunteers. In addition to that, the majority of staff have been furloughed or laid off. So currently, I'm currently furloughed from my position there, and we have our supervisor kind of trying to holding down the fort, doing everything just sort of on his own, and that his responsibilities has expanded to do everything. So it's a real challenge trying to find the bandwidth to really connect with volunteers. So I'm just going to share some of the really special and unique things about Fort Nisqually Volunteer Base. As Allison said, it's really robust. We've got a really strong, dedicated group of people that commit to the organization and have been doing so for through generations and many years. People have, one of the assets of our volunteer program is people have connected sort of outside the museum in a number of ways. So one of the great assets we have right now is a Facebook group that was started, I believe, by volunteers. And it's called Chat About Fort Nisqually, and it's a group of people that are current and former volunteers. And so that Facebook chat group has been a real asset for people to stay connected with one another, not just about Fort volunteer efforts, but just about their passion for history. So I think that's been a real strong asset and really addresses one of the biggest concerns about our volunteer programs right now is having people stay connected with one another and with an institution. So that's been a really, really cool program or website for folks to connect with. We also have volunteers that have organized into guilds. And these are sort of skill-based groups of volunteers that are connecting around their interests, whether that's sewing, music, language. These have largely been volunteer-led to begin with. So these continue to go forward. And these are, we're seeing Music Guild people meet via Zoom. We're seeing our Sewing Guild activated to help us with our sewing masks. So again, these are really positive things that I think are pretty unique, and I'm really glad for the fort to have those available. As far as some of the challenges that we're seeing and facing is we don't have the staff to support a volunteer program at this point. So we are struggling identifying projects for volunteers to do. We are, one of the other challenges I'm seeing is that we're connecting with some of our volunteers through our Sewing Guild and our Music Guild, but there's a huge number of volunteers at the fort who we are missing. And so there's like kind of that imbalance there of reaching just some of our volunteers, but not our larger base, which to me is kind of painful, because you want to keep people connected, but we know we're missing a whole swath of our volunteer base on that. And all of the uncertainty around our reopening is a huge concern to us. We're waiting for information both from the state, but both from our Metro Parks, who it's the umbrella organization under which the fort is organized. And when we check in, we just don't have information routinely. Each week it's a lot of unknowns. So that remains a concern. And as far as my perspective on not being able to connect with our volunteers in the way I would like to, and myself being a volunteer with a couple of organizations, I think one of the key things that that I've seen done and is really helpful is an increase of communication, whatever that may be. So more emails, more phone calls, more check-ins. I think these are really great tools to, even without information. One of our volunteer coordinators, a volunteer themselves at the Southwest Seattle Historical Society, emails us weekly, just letting us know what she's been up to. You know, she was out in the sun today. The museum doesn't have any information about reopening, but these are just, it's a great tool to stay connected in that way. So.
That's great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And as a proud member of the Fort's Music Guild and a very mediocre fiddle player, the Zoom format has worked really well for me because I can mute myself and nobody can hear all of my wrong notes. So I really need to get myself together before we head back to the fort and I have to actually play live where people can hear me. But thank you, thanks. Yeah, I think Elizabeth has really hit on something that we're starting to see as more information is coming out about how to kind of manage volunteers right now, is just that encouragement to communicate. And again, even if you don't have any breaking news to share, just keeping those lines of communication open, I think are really, really helpful. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'd also like to now throw it over to Harriet from the Quincy Valley Historical Society and Museum. So Elizabeth works for the fort, not a huge staff, but definitely, you know, when in good times, when everybody is on the payroll, you know, there is somebody with the dedicated job of kind of working with volunteers. Harriet comes from a museum with, what did you say, like 3/4 of a position, right? I think, Harriet, you.
For me?
Yeah.
No, I'm like a quarter.
Like a quarter. Yeah. So
25.25.
So I think that Harriet can speak to, you know, a lot of you folks out there that are at museums with less than 1 or 0 paid staff, and what does kind of this all look like for those museums. So thank you so much, Harriet. Take it away.
Thanks, Allison. Well, so for me, I think the difference, and thanks for letting me not go first, because it helped clarify. The difference for us is that our organization, we are volunteers. So it's not that we're trying to figure out ways to include volunteers in what our organization is doing. We are volunteers. And so I'm 3/4 of still a volunteer, and I was a volunteer for like 18 years before I went to 0.25. So our whole mindset, I think, is a little bit different. And in the way that we deal with volunteers is different. So because we don't have this, an organizational structure that sort of figures out how we're going to include volunteers in what we're doing, it looks a lot different. And the values inherent in that have not changed even in this COVID thing. So yes, we were completely shut down. The facilities were closed, everything for, you know, however long that was, 6 weeks, 2 months. People just would come in, volunteers, and sort of check on the facilities. After we heard the horror story about the bathroom, we thought, oh my gosh, we need to go in, we need to be checking on our facilities. So we started that every couple days. But maybe I can sort of let you know how we function by telling you about another volunteer that has nothing to do with COVID. And it's where I'm trying to get at in terms of values guide how we deal with our volunteers. So because we don't have an organizational structure with a lot of rules for our volunteers, it's really individual responsibility in terms of our volunteers. And so we have this one little lady who's a master gardener. And she has kind of taken it upon herself the last 5 years to really help us get the grounds here beautified. And anyway, but she also is, as all of us are, has her own little quirks. Okay, so she likes to work really late at night. And so we have a 72, 73-year-old woman here on our site outside. She never comes inside the buildings, but she's outside like late at night because that's when she likes to work in the garden. And her family's a little concerned about her, and we're a little concerned about her. And then yesterday I was here with her, found out, I was showing her how to turn off the sprinkler, the drip system, because we have big grounds here with lots of flowers and things like that. And one time the drip system blew, created a geyser. So late at night, she's calling our police department to come and help her, which that wasn't a good thing. So I'm showing her yesterday how to turn off the drip system. This ever happens, turn this off. Well, so we're getting to the pedestal where the drip system is, and there's a big lavender bush, and there's lots of bees on it. And she goes, oh, I didn't bring my EpiPen. And it's like, oh my gosh, you're out here working in the flowers all the time, lady? Because this is what she does. I mean, she does this at home. She does this here. This is who she is. She is flowers. I said, I wanted to say where you need to have your EpiPen. Anyway, so that was another eye-opening. But people have their own levels of the risk they're willing to take. And so in our organization, I told you about this little lady because that's an ongoing thing with her. And there's a board member too that are, you know, we've had this discussion. Do we make all these rules for our volunteers? Do we say nobody can be on the site after, say, 9 p.m. if you don't come in the buildings? What do we do? We decided that you can't target an individual and make a policy about that. You have to decide on what are the larger values we want to have as an organization. And so that has also guided us then through this COVID time. And we've decided that we're going to give our volunteers choice in what they can choose to do or not to do. So we've tried, number one, we've tried to figure out ways that we can still serve our community. Obviously, we are closed to the public. We're not doing tours, anything like that. But can the gal who works in our archive, if she feels comfortable, we're in phase 2 now, come in here. We provide masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, there's hand washing facilities. If she wants to come in one day a week on her own and work in our archive, are we going to tell her no? So these are some of the things that we've asked. How can we serve our community, and how can we serve our volunteers? And I liked Elizabeth's point. It really gets down to relationship. So, we're not surveying our volunteers. We're we're asking them, we're continuing relationship with them and talking with them about how they want to be involved and what they think, how they think we might be able to serve our community. And out of that has come doing archive work. We just this last weekend started up our Manly Men and Wonder Women Saturday once a month work group. And so they came because our tractor barn needed to be painted. So they started on that. They were all outside, social distanced, you know, and some didn't come because that was their choice. But 9 out of our 10 volunteers, you know, that's an informal survey, but it's not scientific, but I'm saying about 9 out of 10 of our volunteers are regular volunteers. That's not talking about our like educational field trip volunteers who maybe only serve once or twice a year. So I think the American Association of Libraries, right, distinguishes between regular volunteers and temporary volunteers. So temporary volunteers we haven't had as much interaction with, but our regular volunteers, those people are the ones we're communicating with, saying, you know, what do you want to do? What do you feel comfortable with? And then we're allowing them to make those choices. So we just really feel like, let me look at my notes here. We want to make sure we show respect and honor to our volunteers. We feel like if we are mandating and saying, no, you can't come in the building unless you, and this is going to get into maybe a touchy subject, but if we mandate that they have to wear a mask if they come in to volunteer, we feel like that's a rule. Then how are we going to enforce that? So again, it goes back to individual responsibility of whether or not they're going to follow the mandated rules or not. We provide everything that they need, but it's up to them then to make those choices. Some people have some anxiety issues or are claustrophobic. And because of the HIPAA laws, we really shouldn't be asking them about those things. So if they say to me, I don't feel comfortable wearing a mask, I'm not going to say to them, well, tell me why. We're just not going to go there. We're trying to find ways to show respect and honor to our volunteers and allow them to have their own privacy and their own choices. Our board has also talked about legal risk, which is maybe another thing you'll get into. So worst case scenario, if we provided a particular style of mask to our volunteers, and then that might create a false sense of security that they are safe with that particular type of mask. And we all know it's just a face covering. It's not in like an N95 because we can't get those. So could we later be liable because someone did contract COVID and, well, the museum gave me these masks and, you know, I don't know. Those are all suppositions, but in our society, they're things that our board has talked about. Let's see, I think that was probably, I think the only other thing I wanted to say was we have tried to find ways to serve our community during this time. So by keeping the grounds up, at least every other day, somebody is on site here taking pictures, where it's graduation pictures, small wedding pictures. That's always gone on here the last few years, and it has continued. Even the last 6 weeks, we've seen an uptick in that. People are back on site. So we've served our community by making sure that our grounds continue to look really good. We've started a Monday Music at the Museum, where we bring in just 1 or 2 people, and we're putting on a little live Facebook Live mini streamed concert on Monday nights. And then by allowing our volunteers to start up with the things that they want to do inside the museum, that's kind of what we're doing. And waiting for the day when we can open. Sorry, yes. And I way too long.
No, not at all, Harriet. You hit on a couple of I think, really important topics here. Again, the idea that not all of our volunteers are comfortable and can tolerate all of this in the same way. And making sure that we are flexible in responding to where volunteers' level of comfortability is. I will say that the word is coming down finally that there is an expectation that museums provide PPE for their volunteers as they would for their staff. right? And if you were here on Tuesday, you heard me mention I am pulling together this toolkit to kind of go along with the statewide reopening plans, which will give lots of resources around sourcing face masks. Where the heck do we find these things? De-escalation language, if you are mandating that visitors wear them and people don't want to, how do our frontline, the volunteers or the staff at the front desk, how do they handle that situation? All kinds of things. So we're definitely signs to hang in your volunteer, office that kind of is reminding people to wash their hands and sanitize their hands. So we're aware that, you all are kind of looking for that information. Now to the question of liability, and I just see Marianne's added a question about this to the chat. Oh boy, I wish I had an answer to this because everybody has asked it, and I know that even folks higher than me are kind of trying to tackle this thinking. But yes, all we can say is maybe talk to your insurance carriers about that. Marianne is sort of wondering if anybody else has gotten any response from their insurance carriers because they've not kind of been able to get much information about it. So that is this big looming question of liability hanging over us. But just so you know, that's not just for museums, even retail spaces, movie theaters, every sector of our economy is wondering about that issue of liability. So I will keep my ears out for any kind of concrete information about that and certainly pass it along. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks so much, Harriet. Your experience, I think, is really, really valuable. And again, some of your volunteers won't want to come back right now. They just won't feel comfortable coming back. And some of your volunteers would have been back, 2 months ago if they were allowed. And so that's also, adding a layer of how to kind of navigate all of those different feelings is definitely part of this trick. Okay, so I'm going to send it over to Nancy, and I think Nancy has some things to share with us as well. So she's going to be sharing her screen. And in the meantime, definitely keep adding questions and ideas to that chat, and we'll circle back to that once Nancy's done. Okay, take it away, Nancy. I guess I should mention Nancy's from the Highline Heritage Museum, and she's also the only staff member there. And so she can also speak to kind of the challenges of doing it all yourself, for sure. So, okay, there you go, Nancy.
Hi, everyone. First, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. So I am going to be sharing this file. It is the first time I'm doing it, so I just apologize in ahead if I'm not doing properly. So we're at the Highline Heritage Museum, and we opened just last year, June 14th. So our first anniversary will be happening in 3 days. The reason why I'm sharing this is that you can see the mentality and the culture and the mindset that we are in. As Allison explained, I am the only staff person, and we built this museum with almost all volunteer-run force. This is what basically we were dealing with, just the actual structure. We went through all this, and then we really started to rely on volunteers in a way that we just don't have the funds. We had the money to build the facility, but we did not have the funds to actually implement the work that we needed to get done. So we had to, I know it might be hard, I don't see one of the pictures, but it would be hard to see that we have a lot of work done by true volunteers. Like, for example, for our cases, all the cases was true volunteers on multiple levels. My volunteers have no hesitation on what to do. I mean, we at this point is, we are in a survival mode. Are you in? Are you out? And are you flexible? Are you not? If you're not flexible, what would you like to do? Every single time a volunteer comes to us, it's never like, okay, this is what I want you to do. My question to them is, what do you want to do? Why? Because all of us have a set of skills that we're comfortable and we're confident. If you want to learn new experiences, new skills, then we'll target that. But if you're really, really good at graphic design, if you're really good at projects with your hands, then I'm going to be using those skills in the right project. I'm not going to be trying to teach a new volunteer to do some set of skills that they are not comfortable. The last thing I want is to put them into projects that say like, no, I'm not comfortable doing it, I'm not doing it, and they're just walking away. I want them to be there, and I want them to take ownership and be proud of the work that they do and knowing that they're part of this. My volunteers, they are my family, and we are say that to each other. We don't use the term volunteers. We just say, okay, this is a family, museum family. And that's the only way that I can show my respect, my only way that I can show them my gratitude of how much they do for us without expecting anything in serving the community. I know they are not doing it just for me, they're doing it for the whole thing. And I think it creates this environment of this really healthy environment of being proud of what they're doing and being able to really push through issues. You have no idea the issues that we have been facing. As you can see, we have a mixed age of volunteers, but the majority of them are all retired. There's a few that are not. And with that, I do have to be conscious on, once again, what is the right project for them. Organically, by asking them, what would you like to do? They're already segregating themselves as what type of project they can do. If you're only going to be want to work on the front desk, fine. That's the only project you're interested. But if you want to be working with helping me with the building the facilities, as you can see, it's impossible for me to do it all alone. So I need them in a way that is almost like water to me. I need them in a way that is the only way that we can survive. So each one of them, they're really clear as to what they can offer. And from there, we just develop a to-do list. Okay, this is what you can offer. Let's come up with a work plan, and then let's see what we can do as the time passes. With this pandemic, well, I want to show you this. So this is all the installations was done through volunteers. There was nothing that we didn't pay a contractor to do any exhibit installation. All the design was done inside, everything. And we opened, like I said, just a year ago. So we had this mindset of surviving, and we had to close the museum, just in the winter. I mean, we open in summer. We had to close the museum in the winter. So we had to make a lot of adjustments. Since the opening, we've been running a lot of programs. We're really happy with the collaborations that we have. We've been really trying to reach out to the community in a way that, once again, my volunteers feel really, really proud of what they do. The lady that she's, anyway, they are feeling proud. This is not just, oh, it's a volunteer project. No, it's about them showing who they are and expressing themselves. We've been able to also reach out to more diverse communities and through events and programming. I'm gonna go quickly just because of a time restriction, so I apologize for that too. Once again, just different programs, exhibits, and reaching out areas that we had never done it before. Since the winter to spring, we had to hit this new reality from having on-site programming and community engagement and all these really cool programs to have nothing of that. So how do we do that? My volunteers, almost nobody really has that technology capacity or skills to really feel comfortable in doing online things. So we have to come up with different ideas of how to do that. And so since then, I've been able to identify a few volunteers who can continue to work with me in a way that is productive. We've been done a lot of Zoom meetings, introducing them how to do that too, instructions one at a time. In the picture that you see, you can see the difference between working in collections and really collaborative versus just have to do it completely offsite and completely in the Zoom format. It is really, I don't know if you can see it because it's covering the list on the slide, but I'm gonna say it. The building management, it is a new museum, it's a new building. I still don't know the building. So I need to make sure that all the pieces are working properly. And so what I have is one person that comes when the museum is empty, just do a rotation, making sure the pipes are working, making sure that there's no issues with water, making sure that there's no homeless behind our building and no vandalism, none of that. So that person comes kind of patrolling the museum 3 times a week. I have another person who comes 2 times a week for office management. And so that person comes in the times that the building management is not there. So we always only have one person at a time at the building. So we are not interactive. And they already have their own segregated space. So it's not like they are overlapping in any way. So we right now have basically and then I come there once a week. So we have almost every day, we have somebody in the building keeping a social distance, making sure that we check in the building, we are paying the bills. Somebody has to pay the bills. We have to make sure that we get in all the mail, all the packages, there's no any issues, any other, all the legal implications, financial issues, and blah, blah, blah. And then I have, so all those 3 sets of volunteers are on site, but they are not interactive with nobody. Then I have another set of volunteers, social media, graphic design, community engagement, marketing, all that we can do online. So there's no need to interact in the actual the museum. So once again, the idea is to be productive, knowing that we need to survive. I mean, we did not go through all this, and the Historical Society existed for 25 years. Now we're the Highline Heritage Museum. The last thing I want is that after 25 years, we had to close the doors right when we opened the museum. So the eagerness to push forward and to fight back and to be creative, and it is this kind of inner hunger that we all have to make sure that the building and the museum survives. Since June, once again, it's really hard to see. Hopefully we can share this with you. Since June, we've been having a lot of community collaborations, even being closed. A lot of them has been online collaborations, and so we have June, May, April, and March. You can see the listings of what we have done. And then below that, that was all the different programs that we did prior to closing the museum. This morning at 9:30 a.m., right before this meeting, we just launched this thing. It's called the Burien Pandemic Story Project that we are collaborating with the city of Burien. So the 2 of us are joining together and just push for it. It's just another example of how we can do collaborations and continue to work and continue to have that community engagement. We are really active on the social issues that we're facing, and we're trying to keep current as to what's going on. We also launched 7 Stories, which is a project that we started. And the photo, you can see that that's how we started. It was 100 people that came into that night just for that presentation. We had to close the museum the next month. The idea was to do it every month. So we were not able to do that. Instead, what we did is start recording the stories of people, and then trying to present those online. One, as a coincidence, it was her turn. This beautiful lady, Crystal, she shared her story. She's part of the 7 Stories. Plus, we are making, at the very same time, a statement that Black Lives Matter. So that was a really nice combination of what we're doing. Also, last week we have a case in the outside facing the street, so people can actually see our exhibits without have to come to the museum. And so we are celebrating Pride Month, and in Burien we had this event that in the winter the Kennedy High School students protest against the school and the church because they fired 2 of the teachers for being gay. And so because of that, there was a lot of commotion that happened. I think we even made the national news. And so because of that, like, okay, let's combine it, let's work with the students, let's figure out a way that we can actually have this exhibit while we're celebrating Pride Month. And that's what we did. It just happened this last week. And so it's really cool to see that on the streets in Burien, you see the flags, and then you can see the exhibit right next to it that collaborates with that. And so since being closed, the museum, we have produced 25 videos, and it's just, I forgot what I said after. I don't remember what I wrote down there, and I don't see it. But so yeah, we've been able to have more active social media, and it is just, once again, the acknowledgement. Like, for example, for me, this morning, I am awake at 5 in the morning, and I'm sending these updates to everyone, what's going on, what's happening. I'm trying not to do it that frequently because I will fry the brains, and I don't want to do that. But like, for example, every 3 weeks, 3 weeks or so, I will be writing a report, the same report that I will be writing to the board directors. I had to submit a director's report. Well, I'm doing the same thing with my volunteers. I am reporting them, what are we doing in the news, and what are the struggles, and so far, we've been having really good news. It's really painful to go through their work. It's a lot of work. It is painful, but it's at the same time extremely rich to be able to do work knowing that people care so much for this. Once again, they are my family. And we barely use that term, volunteers. We're like, okay, we are a team. What are we gonna do? And then we together and then just jump into it. If people have restrictions of what to do, then we acknowledge that from the very same day that we met them. So, okay, how are you comfortable? What do you wanna do? And once we do have that initial screening, then everything just goes organically because everyone is comfortable in doing it. I'm not forcing anyone to do something they don't wanna do. So they take ownership of that. And then if we do have more volunteers, then I'm making them as the project manager of that specific area. If a person is working on the building, then that person can lead to other volunteers just to work in that. If a person is doing office management issues, they have an extra person helping just to do that. So I do have my key team. I got a core of 5 people, and they have the key to the building. And I trust it so much just because nobody will go through bruising, bleeding, falling, tears and cries and blood with that thinking that they don't, I don't need more proof that they're committed to the organization. And I don't need more proof that they are willing to make sure that this is successful. So we are doing this, like I said, really tightly. So we have 4 people that have the key, and then 1 extra person that come in just to patrol the building outside. So that person doesn't have to go inside the building. Yeah, questions, I will stop my share. I have videos. Yeah.
Nancy, you can, I know you emailed me that presentation, and anything else you want to share with folks, I'll send it out in an email. So if some of your videos and you know, Nancy just listed all these incredible things she's been doing in the past 3 months since her museum's been closed. And those have all been done in collaboration with her family, her museum family, right? So it's really, really impressive. And just so you know, there's tremendous amounts of love, Nancy, and congratulations for you on the new museum. And we are all eager to see you survive through this and thrive through this and reopen for sure. So that was wonderful. I think you got sort of 3 different kind of points of view, but lots of overlap with those themes of communicating, of meeting folks kind of where they are. And it's really, I think, some tremendous work and thinking around this. So a couple of other suggestions that have come up and things that I wanted to share. So my friend Peggy, who's on the phone, who's a former volunteer coordinator, both at Fort Nisqually and worked at the Railroad Museum, wanted to pick up this kind of idea of social media, a really simple kind of way to help or encourage your volunteers to feel like they're supporting your organization right now, is just to get them to share your posts with their social media networks. I mean, it's really simple. If they're comfortable, if they have their own Facebook or Instagram pages, just, you know, that messaging to them that, you know, the more you share these things, the more you like them, the more you say you're interested in an event, the more that that kind of gets seen, right? So that's a pretty low impact way to help from home. I definitely, please throw some questions. Sadie was kind enough to share a video from with some insurance industry folks from Kittitas County that addresses some of those insurance and liability questions that we have. I will be sure to share that with everybody, and I think that'll be really useful. I'd also don't want to put her on the spot, but we have Susan Hesselgrave on the phone today, who is the volunteer coordinator at the Washington State History Museum, and so I'd invite her to unmute herself at any point if there's anything she'd like to share about how she's been kind of interacting with volunteers during this time. There's also, I think, this question of, for the museums that are completely volunteer driven and volunteer run, what happens if the majority of our volunteers don't feel comfortable returning? And I was just reading some, and I think we've mentioned it here before as well. We're always trying to figure out how to engage younger volunteers, and it turns out that you know, summer internships and a lot of those types of things aren't happening for college students and high school students this summer. And if they're looking for ways to kind of get involved in their community, this might be a great opportunity to lure some of them into our museums to do some of that volunteer work. And given that they are not in or many of them are not in a high risk category, maybe some more of that frontline work that might be concern for our more traditional volunteers. So yeah, anything else anybody wants to share before we wrap this up? So there's a question from Mary Kay, percentage of volunteers in the at-risk category, so 60 and over. Do you have volunteers that don't use computers or smartphones and were using a library for their computer? How are you staying that sort of digital divide within our volunteer group? How are you kind of navigating that? Yeah, Nancy.
Phone calls,
Yeah.
just phone calls. To that limit is just hey, how are you? Are you doing okay? If you think about sharing, I think I read something already in the chat. If you want to share something to people about what we're doing, that helps a lot. If you want to be able to help us collect items and artifacts during this COVID-19, that's great. So there's a lot of different ways that we can encourage people to continue to help in their own individual environment. But yeah, I do have volunteers that have no computers, no smartphones, nothing, but they do appreciate that phone call, and it's another way of saying thank you. And there's the sense of gratitude to them that they're willing to help even in the middle of all this is something that I will always be able to highlight, or I want to highlight that constantly. So yeah, phone calls to me.
Yeah, and I would second that. I know back when I was managing the volunteers at the fort, I didn't always do as good a job of this as I would have liked, but I tried to write handwritten thank you notes or just kind of touching base with a letter. And I feel like there's been a renaissance of kind of the handwritten note in the midst of this pandemic. But I think that gestures like that or the check-in phone call really goes a long way, as Nancy said.
And can I also say too, with
yeah.
this, Southwest Seattle Historical Society, there's been efforts to move away from some of the mailings that we've done just for that sense of conservation, but we've definitely made an intention to get those mailings out, not just for volunteers, but for members as well, just to ensure that that communication is still active.
Yes, great segue to a question about membership. Before we do that, I just wanted to acknowledge that some of our museum board members struggle with technology, as was mentioned in the comments. So again, that does add a kind of extra layer of challenge right now, just because we can't communicate face to face for sure. So yeah, there was a question about membership renewals and what the three of you or anybody has sort of ideas around, membership renewals as being a way to often kind of encourage volunteerism, and even just encouraging our volunteers to renew their memberships. And is that something you've been able to do online? Or I don't know, thoughts generally about the kind of confluence of volunteers and members. Any thoughts? I'm not sure I asked that question correctly. Yeah, Nancy.
If I'm talking too much, you can just tell me.
Oh,
this.
Please, go ahead.
The reason why I wake up that early at 5 a.m. every day is to actually do a lot of membership renewals myself. And then if I need help, which I do need help, what I do is that I sign the letters, I print out the letters, I label that, and then have one volunteer to take all that herself and wear gloves and then do all the mailing out. And then we do have this e-news format with all the members, so they are constantly updated probably every 2 weeks or so that we have that communication. But when it comes to the renewals, yes, we do that once per quarter. So we're just going to do it once, the whole thing once. It's a lot of work. And then after that, I don't have to do it again until the summer, well, officially the summer. So that is helping to continuing. Once again, we just opened the museum. So we need to make sure that for us, it's more establishing that we have that going. It is a brand new format for us. So for us, it's reinforcing that this is something that we want to continue regardless of what's going on.
Yeah, awesome. So another question that's come up, I think particularly for sites where volunteers, like in all three of these cases, volunteers have a lot of buy-in and feel very comfortable in your spaces, and pre-COVID came and went as they pleased, I'm sure. Like while there were maybe schedules for volunteers and that sort of thing, how strictly that was all enforced. maybe was different. Now it seems important to more strictly enforce and to communicate more clearly those schedules, just to discourage having too many people in the space at a time. So do any of you guys have thoughts on the system for doing that? I don't know what kind of volunteer management systems you use, and then sort of that scheduling piece of it. Nancy.
Yeah, like I said, we already have the schedule, so we know which day we should not come. Like my day will be on Fridays. That's the day that I come to the museum. And so everyone knows that that's the day. I got my volunteers that have, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And then another one that is Tuesday and Thursday. So we have a preset schedule. So we are never overlapping with each other. And we always have our own time in the schedule. And then when we do come, we do have a restriction that they need to be wearing the gloves, they need to be wearing the mask, because they're going to be passing all that to the next person that comes into the space. So that's why we are really strict on, okay, if it's office management projects, just that space, don't interact with the rest of the building, just go there. The only area that I see the overlapping is the bathrooms. So I'm asking people to please come in and wipe all the surfaces when they finish the bathrooms. That's the only area that I see a conflict on sharing spaces. Other than that, they have a very, very distinctive dates, times, spaces. When we open the museum, that will be the very same issue as to how do we interact with volunteers and the visitors, and then the bathrooms. I think of everything for me is the bathrooms, because it seems like, the volunteers that have their own space, we will have our own space. The visitors will have their own, the gallery space, but the bathrooms is an area that we all of us share. And so that is the area that I'm more concerned as to make sure that we are having that, those rules to be strict. And the way I'm telling people, my volunteers that come, they're comfortable doing their own projects without interacting with people. But, I'm telling them this is not by you. The same way as you giving for this organization, for the community, you're protecting not yourself, you're protecting everyone. So it's the same vein, it's the same message. The way you're giving, why are you volunteering? Are you here to serve the community? Well, you need to protect as much as you can yourself. So you're serving the community that way. So
yeah. Just a word on the bathrooms, because I've also been thinking a lot about bathrooms in general and what going to a public restroom might look like after all of this. I read an article somewhere that bathrooms are designed to be cleaned thoroughly and well. Like they're just sort of inherent in their structure. The surfaces can be wiped down as many times as you need to, and assuming you don't have any antique varnishes or things to be concerned about. So that, I don't know why that made me feel better, but you're absolutely right. That seems to be kind of a point of concern. A few other ideas and things thoughts really that are coming out of the chat. Julie mentioned that she sends out a volunteer application with every membership renewal form, which I think is a great idea, just a little kind of nudge in that direction. Let's see, and Susan has mentioned, and I know that this is true for a lot of museums.
Allison,
go ahead. Yeah.
Harriet has been trying to get our attention for a while, so.
Oh.
That's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Harriet. Unmute
okay.
and go for it.
So I was wanting to comment on Susan's. So that is
Oh,
one
great. Perfect.
that we didn't really bring up was the whole social aspect. And, so you've got caring for people's health, but people are not just their physical bodies. They are total beings. And so if we are not caring for our volunteers in a total way, I think we're letting them down. So, and I've gotten that message from a few of our volunteers. It's like, okay, well, don't, I know you're really concerned about this and this and this, but it is really important to me to come here to the museum site, and like our manly men and Wonder Women, and see these people and continue this. They are in a collaborative environment there when they work together, and they were all able to figure out ways to social distance outside and work. And I let them take the lead on that. instead of me trying to tell them what to do, I said, well, this is how we feel about this. You know, how can we make this work for everybody? And then they did.
Yeah.
So the social aspect, I don't feel like we can do away with that, because that is part of who we are as people. And if we're leaving that out of listening to our volunteers, then we're not caring for them as total people. That's just my.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's going to require some creative thinking about how to give them those social opportunities in safe ways. I have never, you know, I worked at Fort Nisqually for 3 years. I never walked into an event there that I wasn't hugged by at least 10 to 15 volunteers. Like, they're just, again, it is, as Nancy says, a family, and there's that warmth and there's that joy in being together, in addition to doing the work on the behalf of the museum. And so it's really hard and strange to think about what that might all look like. And I remind myself that it's not going to be forever. We don't have to stop hugging forever.
I see people know though. I mean, I see people doing this a lot.
Yeah,
A lot with each other. Like, I'm giving you a virtual hug, you know, and we kind of make light of it and fun. And
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so the warmth can still be there for sure. Thank you so much, Harriet. I want to just pick up a little bit on that as well, and just echo a few things from the chat before we kind of wrap up. And I'll certainly go through the chat once we sign off, and if there's anything that I've forgotten, I'll make sure to address it or raise it in the email that I send. I do think that as far as with this kind of social aspect, our colleagues at the Museum Flight mentioned that they kind of host these kind of digital informational presentations a couple of times a week, and it's actually led by a volunteer for the volunteers. So again, creating that kind of, sort of what Harriet was saying, that kind of, and sort of like the guilds at the fort, and those kind of volunteer driven kind of opportunities for folks to interact. I do know that Susan, and I know this is, I think this is probably true at the fort and maybe at other museums, a big way that volunteers really participate in the work of a lot of museums is at big events, or in leading and facilitating school programs for school kids. And we don't anticipate those things happening in the same way, certainly, long after even our museums have been allowed to reopen. So I don't think just because we're moving through the phases and the doors of the museums are reopening, there's going to be an end to the kind of creative thinking that we have to do to keep volunteers engaged in new and different ways, because a lot of those traditional opportunities at our spaces that volunteers have kind of supported that work might not look the same. So yeah. Lan, are you seeing anything else in the chat that I still haven't really figured out how to do this chat thing, because I get so wrapped up in what everybody is saying, and then I look over at the chat and all of a sudden there's like 10 new things in there. And but I think I got most of what kind of everybody had wanted to say and ideas. Thank you so much. I just am so heartened by the generosity of this community of heritage organizations, and all of you, whether you're volunteers or museum professionals. You just bring so much to these conversations, and so much heart to your work, and creative energy. So thank you all. Thank you all again. So next week we have 2 more sessions that are really going to focus on programs. I know a lot of folks are wondering, what do school programs look like in the fall, and how can we support teachers and students when they can't physically come to our museums? So that conversation is going to be on Tuesday at 10, and then on Thursday at 2 o'clock we'll talk about public programs, more sort of another conversation about virtual programming. I know Harriet's been doing her Music Mondays, and Nancy's been doing a ton of virtual programming, and the Fort has their YouTube channel up and running. But we also want to kind of consider how we can start earning some revenue from these virtual programs, you know, suggested donations and how to build that in, because we know that the elephant in the room of all of these conversations is the economic sustainability of our organizations. So do plan to join us for that on Thursday. I'll thank Elizabeth and Harriet and Nancy so much again for your time and for your generosity today. And yes, go forth and stay in touch. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, Lynn.
Anytime.